Expedition. True stories of man's quest for the unknown. Through the steaming jungles. Across the burning desert. To the depths of treacherous seas. And to the highest mountains of the world. Expedition. Actual films of the great expeditions of our time. Recorded as they happened. Your host is the famous deep-sea diver, author, and explorer, Colonel John D. Craig. Here is Colonel Craig.
One of the places we never think of as being remote and unexplored is Europe. But in the far north of Scandinavia lives a nomadic people whose ancestors settled there 12,000 years ago. They are the Laplanders, whose survival in an age world depends on their reindeer. Tonight we're going to join a Lapp family and travel with them as they drive 1,500 reindeer across the frozen Arctic in search of food. A Norwegian expedition spent more than a year recording their fight for life in Survivors of the Ice Age. We'll begin in a moment. We who live in moderate climates have it pretty easy when it comes to getting our food. We simply go out into the garden or to the store. Even so, who hasn't complained about that? But up at the far northern tip of Norway, it's very different. The people there, the Laplanders, depend entirely on their reindeer for survival. Every year, the migration of the huge herds over dangerous ice and rock terrain to summer pastures is a terrifying race against time. A Norwegian expedition filmed this remarkable drama. And by the way, it was so outstanding that it won international honors at the Cannes Film Festival. The expedition's leader was the famed explorer, Per Host. Here now is his own account.
It wasn't easy to reach the true Laplanders who lived far north of the Arctic Circle. To find these nomadic people, we had to travel beyond the last Norwegian villages, beyond the reach of the last trading posts, and into the most isolated parts of the great Arctic plain, known as the Finnmarksvidda. Between Kautokeino and Karasjak, the plains seem endless. We traveled for days without even seeing a Lapp tent. The traders who come to this area had told me that here I would find the encampment of old Matti Mikkel, who owns 1,500 reindeer. When we saw the first herds, I knew we were close. If Matti Mikkel and his family accepted us, we would live and move with them for a whole year. We would get to know them in a way which had never been attempted. That was our mission. Matti Mikkel's camp, housing all his numerous family, was by a frozen stream which divides the territories of two Lapp tribes. Just a small group of tents of reindeer wool and skin. But Matti Mikkel's 1,500 reindeer made him the richest herder of the entire region. Matti Mikkel's wife, their son Antti, a pet crow. It belongs to Matti Mikkel's grandson, little Joe Matti. Gradually, I met them all. Matti Mikkel's closest neighbor by his winter camp is old Biera. His herd numbered more than 1,000. It takes about 200 animals to supply even a small family, because the Lapps get everything they need from the reindeer. Their food, their clothing, their shelter. In the winter, old Biera and Matti Mikkel often let their herds pasture together. This makes it easier to protect them against the wolves. Little Joe says that in all the world, there are no bigger herds than his grandfather's and old Biera's. Little Joe is only 8, but already he's a keen hunter. Every day he goes scouting among the birches where he's set up snares for the ptarmigan, This bird is a kind of Arctic grouse, delicious to eat, especially when it's roasted over an open fire at the end of a hard day's work. The struggle for life is difficult for both man and animal. Those who hope to survive must be hardy from childhood. And so the Lap children must start early to learn all the skills which their people have developed over the centuries. I had been living with Matti Mikkel for several weeks when one day a visitor arrived. He was from a different tribe, the Karasjoks. You can always recognize the Karasjoks by their distinctive hats. His name was Nilas, and he said he wanted to become a herdsman for Matti Mikkel. Lately, the wolves had become more bold. The old man needed another herdsman, and so Nilas was hired. To me, it seemed that Nilas was more interested in Matti Mikkel's pretty daughter Rauna than in his reindeer. The Lapps are such wonderful people. Once you're accepted, you become a part of the family circle. And so it was with Nilas. It was fun to have somebody new around, and Nilas was full of amusing stories. For the Lapps, wolves are a terrible menace. They kill far more reindeer than they can possibly eat. And with every reindeer killed comes the threat of hunger. One night, while Nilas was telling stories, rather than tending the herd, wolves had gone on a rampage, killing more than a dozen of Matti Mikkel's best animals. And so he was unceremoniously fired and sent back to his own tribe. Finally, around Easter, came the moment for which we'd been waiting. This is the time when the reindeer are ready to migrate to the coast in search of summer pastures, and the Lapps break camp to follow them. Dried reindeer meat, black pudding, and homemade dried reindeer milk were prepared long ago for the long journey. Now they are loaded on the sleds. Other sleds are loaded with firewood because there's little wood to be found on the way. It takes 2 or 3 weeks across hostile and barren wilderness to reach the coast. Everything we need for survival must be carried with us. Finally, in the middle of April, the tents are taken down and strapped on the sleds. And so we start out on a long journey. For 3 long weeks, it will be a constant struggle of men and animals against the elements. There are 30 sleds, heavily loaded. The herd itself is already moving ahead of us. Once the fever of migration is upon them, they are hard to hold back. The distance to the coast is about 100 miles as the crow flies. But the journey for us will be twice that long. There are many difficult stretches, especially across the mountains. And the reindeer themselves don't move in a straight line. They travel a zigzag course, constantly searching for food. And so our daily progress toward the coast is actually less than 5 or 6 miles. I was intrigued to see how similar the Lapp shelters are to the teepees I've seen of the American Indians. But the difference is that these are covered with reindeer skins, and the Indians use buffalo hides. The Lapp tents take only a few minutes to put up. And no matter how cold it gets outside, inside, around the fire, it's quite comfortable. While Auntie tells old stories of gnomes and witches, the family has dinner. It's a simple diet. Reindeer meat. And it tastes best when it's roasted on the embers. Outside, the temperature has dropped to 30 below. But inside, the family is warm and safe from the blizzard. Then there's hot coffee in hand-carved wooden mugs. And Auntie tries something different. Dried reindeer meat dipped in coffee to give it a special flavor. Without end, the wind howls. The Lapps are used to it. They know it won't last forever. Actually, it was morning when the family went to sleep, because on the spring migration, the Lapps rest during the day and move during the night. At the end of April, the heat of the noonday sun makes the snow melt, and the going becomes very difficult. But when the sun drops below the horizon, the frost forms a hard crust, and men and animals can move more easily. Late in the evening, Matti Mikkel and his people round up their animals. It takes 2 or 3 hours just to get the deer together and load the sleds. There's now a new urgency to the migration. Very difficult stretches lie just ahead, and any delay could be disastrous. The cows might have their calves before we reach the summer pastures. And this would be a great tragedy, because many of them might die in the snow. We break camp just before dawn, which in the Arctic comes only an hour or 2 after midnight. And so the journey continues. 30 sleds in a long line on their quiet way through the pass. But suddenly, chaos. After it was all over, no one could quite explain what had happened. Apparently something frightened the lead deer, and panic swept down the line. But accidents like this happen often when the Lapps are on the move and they take them in their stride. It doesn't take long to repair any damage to the sleds and round up the scattered deer. Even so, it's a delay the Lapps can ill afford. Even the youngest pitch in, with more determination than effect. before long, we are again on our way, pushing relentlessly forward toward the coast.
And so the race for survival continues. The Lapps must reach the pastures before female reindeer have their babies. Unfortunately, a calf is born early, and the mother reindeer is torn between staying behind with it or continuing with the herd. This is one of the most touching incidents that I've ever seen. We'll continue in just one moment.
The need more difficult the terrain. The plains give way to hills, and the hills to mountains. But here, for the first time, the reindeer find pastures relatively free of snow and ice. Here they won't have to scratch so hard for their food. Here we'll rest until the animals have regained their strength. The air has turned mild, and little Joe decided to change his footwear. When the weather is cold and dry, the Lapps use boots with fur on the outside. But now, in the wet spring snow, they wear boots made of leather with woolen leggings, and these they line with dry grass. The sun is warmer every day, and on the rivers and lakes, the ice starts to melt. Little Joe and his friends know that the trout never bite better than at this time of the year. But we can't stop here forever. Driven by an irresistible urge, the herd begins to move again, and we must follow. Wet snow on the ground makes progress difficult. The last part of the journey to the coast is very hard on everyone. Even the Lapps, who are better conditioned for hardship than we are, feel the strain. But it's essential to reach the sea as soon as possible, before the reindeer begin to calve. The herd will have to swim a long distance on the icy waters of the fjord, and the newborn calves couldn't make it. There are frequent stops for rest. Now little Joe finds it's too warm for his fur-covered parka. But now, what we'd feared most was about to happen. From the way some of the cows are behaving, Matty Mickle could tell that some calves were about to be born, much too early. Quickly, the herdsmen move in to separate the more spirited bulls from the cows. Bulls have been known to kill newborn calves out of pure jealousy. And then, suddenly, there before us, the miracle of new life. Ordinarily, everyone would be happy, for each new calf is important to survival. But when it arrives early, in the midst of the migration, it can mean much heartache and tragedy. There are still so many difficult miles ahead. How on earth can this little fellow keep up? And in the mother's eyes, we can see the age-old struggle between mother love and the migration instinct, the immense pull of the herd. The great herd has begun to move. The cow knows she has to keep up with it. Nothing will halt the migration. The deer are starved for salt, which they can only find on the coast, and for the soft green moss of the summer pastures across the fjord. The calf is now 10 minutes old. It still looks terribly helpless. But the wonderful thing is that only half an hour later, it'll stand up and attempt to follow the mother. The cow becomes more and more nervous as she watches the moving herd. We wonder if she actually realizes that for the reindeer, there is safety only in numbers, that wolves are waiting to pick off stragglers. Matty Mickle says that sometimes it happens that a mother leaves a calf behind. So strong is the force of the migrating instinct. The baby's strength grows very quickly, but not quickly enough. Now it's an hour old and trying desperately to walk. But it's quite obvious that it will never be able to keep up with the herd. But it won't be left behind. The rescue is the job of the youngsters. As the last of the great herd starts out, the children catch the little fellow to put him safely on a sled. The mother is also roped so that her baby will have its milk on the journey to the coast. The Lap children have the pleasant task of looking after these early calves. Later, when the Laps have reached the summer pastures, each premature baby deer will become the property of the youngster who looked after it. That is their reward. But right now, it's only important that they have something warm and cuddly to love and care for on the difficult stretch that lies ahead. And for them, that is reward enough.
After all this, Matty Mickle and his family are still a long way from reaching their goal. But even when they do, they still must cross an icy fjord 3 miles wide. In a moment, we'll see some preview scenes from that exciting episode. Next week, we rejoin the Laplanders as they struggle on toward their goal. Through the wet snow, roaring glacial streams, straight down a 2-mile embankment until they reach the icy fjord, the final obstacle between them and the summer pastures. They move cautiously, for the herd is their entire means of survival. But partway across, the herd panics. Desperately, the exhausted reindeer churn and thrash in a huge, aimless circle. Next week, last of the Arctic nomads. I hope you'll join us again next week for the last of the Arctic nomads. I think it's even more exciting than the film we've seen tonight. Until then, this is John Craig saying thank you and good night.